If you're just starting in chess and don't know how to begin a game, you're not alone. Not knowing openings, doubting from the first move, and making quick mistakes makes the game complicated before it even starts. Openings dictate how you're going to play the entire rest of the game. In this video, you have just what you need. We've compiled the very best openings, explained in a step-by-step manner, specifically designed for beginners who wish to understand what to play, when to play it, and the reasoning behind it. You'll learn how to develop your pieces purposefully, how to effectively fight for control of the center, and how to avoid the most frequent mistakes right from the very beginning. This isn't about simply memorizing moves, but rather about grasping clear fundamental ideas that consistently prove effective in actual games. The Queen's Gambit. To start, it's important to know that controlling the central squares is very important. The Queen's Gambit is closely related to this control of the center. It's also necessary to do other things in the opening. Develop knights and bishops as early as possible, castle to keep the king safe, and maintain good coordination between the pieces. But dominance of those central squares is absolutely fundamental. The ideal would be to reach those two central squares with two pawns, the queen's pawn and the king's pawn, so we control a large number of the opponent's squares and limit their development. In football, control of the midfield is essential. In chess, something similar happens. Whoever controls the center usually has more attacking possibilities. That's why the game usually starts by moving the king's pawn or queen's pawn two squares. In the Queen's Gambit, the queen's pawn is moved first, d4. And of course, by playing d4 on the first move, we aim to follow up with e4 if the opponent does not prevent it. Before c4, the two most common moves for black are those that aim to stop white from placing another pawn in the center. One is d5, which we will cover in this video. The other is knight f6, which leads to Indian defenses. Knight f6 is a developing move. Black develops a knight, controls important squares, and of course prevents white from playing e4 unchallenged. But as I said, d5 is the move that interests us now. And here the move proposed by the Queen's Gambit is c4. It's clear that with d5, black has prevented us from moving another pawn to the center. With c4, we are sacrificing a pawn, since black can capture it immediately. It's not entirely clear, and we will discuss it now, whether white will recover it. But the first question is, what is the essence of the Queen's Gambit? Why is white willing to give up a pawn? The key is controlling the center. Once black captures this pawn, white gains more central presence. The enemy pawn that controlled the important c4 square disappears, and white gains space and influence. Additionally, open lines for pieces are created. Now let's see what white can do if black accepts the gambit. If black accepts, there is a very simple and immediate way to regain the pawn. Queen to a 4 check. We could play queen a 4 check and recover the pawn almost without thinking. The problem is that bringing out the queen early is generally not good. She is exposed to attacks from enemy pieces. The opponent develops their pieces, gaining time on the queen, and while they improve their position, we are forced to move the queen again and again. This is important in chess. In the opening, it's not good to move the same piece twice unnecessarily. Therefore, even though queen a 4 check quickly regains the pawn, it's not a very recommended move. So what are the main moves in this position? Well, here white could play e4, obtaining an impressive pawn center and controlling the central squares we mentioned earlier. It's a sound, interesting, and highly recommended option. However, when we play e4, black may quickly pressure this center, sometimes with a central break, like c5 or e5, or through maneuvers targeting the e4 pawn. Everything has pros and cons. Knight developments, knight f3 or knight c3, are also natural moves that develop pieces without taking risks. The von Cloud opening. The von Cloud opening is defined by a gesture as simple as it is provocative: the early displacement of the king to e2. From a classical point of view, it violates fundamental rules of development and safety, but its central idea is not objective, but rather practical. The objective is to take the opponent out of known theory and force them to think from the very first moment in an unexpected position. In the first variation of the game, play commences with e4, where white immediately occupies the center and develops their pieces. Black responds with e5, symmetrically claiming its own central space. With king e2, the white king deliberately moves forward, foregoing castling in order to create psychological disorientation. Black continues with c6, developing a piece and reinforcing their control of the center. After knight to f3, white continues their natural development, supporting the center and preparing the d4 pawn break. This variation seeks to normalize the position after the initial psychological impact. It is useful for players who place more reliance on the activity of their pieces than on the safety of their king. In the second variation, e4 once again establishes central control and opens up the lines. Black responds with e5, maintaining the classic balance. e2 reappears as the very essence of the von Cloud, an unnatural move that truly challenges the opponent. Black responds with knight to f6, immediately attacking the central pawn and rapidly accelerating their development. With d3, white supports e4 and opts for a more solid structure, despite the king's exposure. Here, the von Cloud adopts a more cautious approach after the initial blow. It serves to reduce immediate risks and guide the game towards a playable middle game. The game commences with a king's pawn advance, seeking to establish a solid and tranquil structure. This is met with an immediate countermove, another pawn advance, seizing control of the central area. Then on the second move, the central position is further strengthened by the queen's pawn, ensuring continued flexibility. The opponent responds with a similar move to fight for the center. Following that, the king's knight develops to a central square. In response, another knight enters play, increasing the pressure on the center. Subsequently, that knight completes its journey to the characteristic square of the chaos opening. In response, a bishop develops, aiming towards the center and the king side. On the fifth move, the second knight enters play, following the typical opening plan. From the other side of the board, the queen's knight develops to improve the coordination of the pieces. To conclude the sequence, that knight completes its maneuver and is placed in its final destination. Finally, the king secures his safety by castling kingside, thereby concluding the opening phase and initiating the middle game. The Grob opening. The Grob opening begins with 1, g4, a pawn advance that breaks all traditional schemes. It doesn't control the center, weakens castling, and seems, at first glance, a mistake. But its idea is much deeper, to pull the opponent out of theory from the very first second and force them to think for themselves. Following g4, d5, Black responds in a logical manner by occupying the center and indirectly attacking the weakened flank. Grob continues with h3, consolidating the g4 pawn and preventing any immediate tactical ideas. The message is quite clear: this will not be a conventional duel. If Black plays a 5 with the objective of achieving total central dominance, ag2 develops its bishop along the long diagonal, directly aiming at the central squares and the enemy king. Meanwhile, White prepares a dynamic and rather unpredictable style of play. In another frequently played line, after the moves g4 and cf6, Black opts for a more solid development strategy. White continues with g5, expelling the knight and gaining valuable space on the king side. After cd5, bishop g2 proves crucial once more, preparing long-term pressure and a potential surprise attack. The position is strange, yes, but it's also psychologically unsettling for the opponent, who can no longer depend on automatic preset plans. White pieces avoid the direct center and carefully prepare their bishop. Black establishes control of the center in a classic fashion. White fianchettos their bishop, preparing to exert influence from afar, and Black responds with knight c6, providing support for the center. e3 is then played, a patient, unhurried move, specifically designed to facilitate development. Black is continuing to develop his pieces quite naturally. White is reinforcing the center and getting ready to castle, and the Black bishop comes out without compromising the overall structure. Bishop to e2. The plan is clear: to get ready for castling. Black castles, and White will then complete their development with castling. The classical variation is quiet because it does not seek a quick advantage. First, the pieces are developed, and then one castles. The center is pressured from afar, especially with the bishop on b2, which is the key piece of the entire plan. Since there are no forced lines, the move order is flexible, and the game is played more by ideas and understanding than by memory, which usually leads to calm and open positions. Let's now look at the solid variation. White once again avoids the direct center and prepares the bishop. Black establishes a solid presence in the center. The white bishop fianchettos and begins to exert pressure from the diagonal. Knight f6. Natural development and control of the center. White plays e3, a quiet move to open lines and continue developing. Black reinforces the center and keeps everything well closed. Knight f3. White brings out pieces and prepares for castling. Black develops without compromising their position with bishop e7. The main objective here is to castle quickly, which is why bishop e2 is played. The Black king remains completely safe, and White also castles their king. The Leningrad variation of the Dutch defense. In club games, many players seek the safety of familiar structures. Others prefer the calm equality of classical responses to the queen's pawn. However, anyone choosing the Dutch knows perfectly well they are entering different territory.
From the very first move, with one f5 challenging white without permission, it is understood that the game will not be a walk in the park, but a battle where every piece must work. The story begins. White opens with d4, solid, classic, stable, a move that claims territory and prepares central control. Black responds without hesitation, f5. It is like a declaration of intentions. There will be no symmetrical development nor impersonal game. Black wants imbalances initiative and to make white think. White often replies with g3, a modern and very serious move. Those who play g3 are not improvising, they are building a fianchetto to control the long diagonal and hinder Black's natural development. After nf6, g6, and big 7, both sides reveal their cards. No matter how many times this position is repeated, each game seems different because plans diverge and ideas change according to timing and style. Castling arrives early for both players. Black plays 0-0 with that mix of calm and danger, because in the Dutch, castling does not always mean full safety. Sometimes it is preparation to attack weak squares on the king's flank. After d6, the structure seems to settle, and white places a knight on c3, building a spacious and flexible center. And here the essence of the Leningrad reveals itself. The resulting position is its initial landscape, the starting point from which everything can happen. Black has multiple paths, as if facing a board full of closed doors, each promising a different type of fight: c6, nc6, or qe8. The last, qe8, is a favorite of many specialists and the protagonist of this narrative.
White occupies the center and develops their major pieces, causing Black to challenge the center immediately without prior preparation. White accepts the challenge and clarifies the central tension. The queen comes out early to regain the pawn and take an active role from the start. Natural development gains time by attacking the queen with knight c3, and the black queen moves to an active square, avoiding further attacks. White establishes a strong central presence and gains valuable space, to which Black responds by reinforcing their own center and preparing for solid development. This leads to logical development and a firm control over the central squares. Black then pins the knight, creating early pressure. Bishop c4, an active piece directly targeting the king side. Black consolidates the center and opens lines for their pieces. White castles the king and connects rooks. Given that, Black completes development with a stable position. The classical variation is characterized by the early and active use of the queen, which recaptures the pawn and places itself on a safe square without becoming passive. Its strengths are structural clarity, straightforward and well-defined plans, and a solid position that effectively reduces theoretical complexity. In exchange for accepting a somewhat slower development, Black gains stability, order, and a practical game, ideal for those who prioritize understanding and control over unnecessary complications. Now let's examine the modern variation. White takes control of the center, prompting Black to challenge it right away. The central pawn structure is then established. Black avoids bringing out their queen too early, develops their knight, and prepares to recapture the pawn. The white pieces strengthen their central position, and the black knight then recaptures the pawn from an active square. This allows for natural development and effective central control. The black pieces consolidate the center, thereby gaining crucial stability. Bishop c4, an active piece, aiming at the king's flank. Active development and putting pressure on the knight with bishop g4. White castles and black closes the center, preparing the development of the bishop and castling. White questions the bishop's pressure. Black maintains the pin without weakening.
The Trompovsky attack. This begins with d4, where your opponent will usually continue with knight f6. Let's take a look at this. Our second move will always be the same. After d4, we're going to play g5, moving directly into the Trompovsky attack. From this position, we immediately put pressure on the f6 knight, which proves quite uncomfortable for black. The first question that we need to address is, what happens if your opponent responds with c4? At first glance, this appears to be quite a good move, because the knight retreats from the threat and also counterattacks the bishop, giving the impression that it refutes the second move, ag5. In that case, we will continue with h4, defending the bishop. In most situations, that bishop will eventually be captured because the knight on e4 is unstable. It's on the white square, becoming a clear target. Then we'll attack it, forcing black to lose tempo, retreating the knight or exchanging it. Most often, the exchange happens after c takes g5 and h takes g5. With this, we get a very advanced pawn that has gained a lot of space on the king side, and furthermore, we activate the rook from its starting square thanks to the open h file. This rook will be a serious problem for black in the long run. Black usually continues with e6, a natural developing move that also attacks that advanced pawn. Here, a very interesting line appears that involves a sacrifice. Instead of defending the pawn, we play g6. At first glance, this sacrifice isn't easily understood, but it makes a lot of sense. With g6, we attack the h-pawn, and remember that we have the rook behind. Black cannot capture with their h-pawn because they would lose their rook, and that constitutes a first trap. Usually, the opponent will realize this and play fx g6, accepting the sacrifice. We then continue with e3. At this very moment, the opponent still doesn't quite grasp the full reason why we sacrificed that pawn, but the undeniable truth is that the black king's kingside is no longer the same. Black will want to castle, so they will play b7 with that idea, and we will respond with bd3. Here, there's already a clear threat. Bishop takes g6. This is a very important resource that you always need to keep in mind. For example, if black plays something like c6, we can play a takes g6, and black cannot capture because they would lose their rook. Additionally, we are attacking the h-pawn twice, which is extremely dangerous for them. The opponent may or may not realize all of this, but they will typically proceed to castle, creating the impression that everything is completely under control. In the classical variation, white begins the game by moving the king's pawn forward, aiming to control the center of the board and develop their pieces. Black responds by moving a pawn to support the center and maintain a secure position. Next, white moves forward with the queen's pawn, aiming to gain more space on the board. Black then develops their king's knight, preparing to attack the center. White continues to develop their pieces by bringing out the queen's knight, which also helps to defend the central squares. Black advances the kingside pawn with the clear intention of placing their bishop on a strong, active diagonal. Then, white develops the king's knight, preparing to castle, and black brings out the king's bishop. White develops the king's bishop to castle safely. Black performs short castling, protecting their king. If you don't know what castling is, you can click the link in the top right corner, where we'll explain it in more detail. Finally, white also castles, ensuring both kings are safe and the pieces are ready to continue the game. Experienced players employ the classic puck defense to establish a solid and flexible game, carefully avoiding premature risks and committing to a long-term strategic plan. In the Austrian variation, the white pieces begin the game by advancing their king's pawn to take control of the center and open up the play. Black responds with a calm move, pushing a pawn to strengthen their central position. Next, the opponent pushes the queen's pawn to gain more space, and black develops their king's knight to pressure the center. White continues developing the queen's knight, supporting the central pawns. Black advances their king's pawn with the intention of developing their bishop along a long diagonal. Following this, white pushes their king's pawn forward, an aggressive maneuver that defines the Austrian variation, aiming to attack the center and seize the initiative. Black responds by developing their king's bishop, thereby strengthening their overall defense. Following this, white develops their king's knight, preparing for castling and supporting the central attack. Black castles kingside to protect their king. Finally, white develops their bishop, positioning it actively where it aims at the opponent's castle position and aids in the attack.
King's Gambit. This particular opening perfectly embodies the romantic spirit of the game, where the emphasis on attack and initiative is valued far more than mere material advantage. Everything begins with the classic opening moves, e4, e5, and then white plays f4. With this specific move, they are voluntarily sacrificing a pawn. It's not a mistake, it's an open invitation to a fierce battle. White sacrifices material to open lines and quickly launch an attack on the black king. If black accepts the sacrifice and plays e takes f4, we enter what's known as the king's gambit accepted. From here, White's plan is clear: to develop the pieces as quickly as possible, bring the knight to f3, the bishop to c4, and castle to launch a direct attack. The main idea behind the gambit is to dominate the center and take advantage of the open f-file. White is looking for initiative, gaining time and maintaining constant pressure. Meanwhile, Black needs to defend themselves with extreme caution, because even a single error could result in a devastating attack.
Cf3 is often a move that it's advantageous to play as early as you possibly can, because this knight not only exerts significant pressure on the central squares, but it also effectively controls a crucial square to prevent any potential queen checks. To be more precise, it takes command of the h4 square, a critical square from which the opposing player could potentially create some very significant difficulties. Consequently, the knight is excellently positioned on f3, performing a function that is both defensive and strategic. Once nf3 has been played, and that annoying check is controlled, the main objective becomes clear. The ideal plan would be to play d4, to recover the pawn, and no longer be at a material disadvantage. Furthermore, the f1 bishop is intended to develop to c4, as f7 is the opponent's weakest square at the start of the game. For those who don't know why, it's a square next to the king that, under normal circumstances, is only defended by the king itself. It cannot be adequately defended by the rook on f7, nor effectively by the bishop or the queen positioned on that very same square, given that these pieces are typically overprotected and therefore do not fulfill an efficient defensive purpose there. Other squares near the king are usually well defended by the queen, the knight, the bishop, or even several pieces at once. However, f7 normally only has the king's defense, which makes it a key target for attack. For this reason, it is absolutely essential to have a bishop pointing directly at that square. This gambit offers significant advantages. It allows for rapid development, creates dynamic positions, and places the opponent under psychological pressure right from the very start. But it also carries risks. The white king can become exposed, and if the attack doesn't succeed, Black will be left with an extra pawn and a very solid position. Throughout the course of history, many famous defenses have arisen against the king's gambit, such as the classical defense or the Fischer defense. In fact, Bobby Fischer, who is considered one of the greatest players of all time, famously criticized it. Even though he did play it himself, the king's gambit is certainly not a game for conservative players. It's for those who truly delight in attacking, sacrificing, and crafting truly spectacular games. The Reti opening commences with the move knight to f3, a strategic play that deliberately avoids committing central pawns right from the outset, and instead prioritizes the rapid development of pieces. His main idea is clear: to control the center from a distance, to provoke the opponent into occupying it, and then attack it later with much greater flexibility. After Sapphire 3 of 5, Black claims the center in a classic manner. Reti responds with c4, immediately challenging that pawn and compelling the opponent to make a crucial decision. If Black chooses to advance with d4, they gain valuable space, but in doing so, they also fix a pawn structure that could potentially become a target. Consequently, e3 prepares the development of the bishop and a direct attack against that advanced pawn. Following c6, which solidifies the center, e takes d4, c takes d4. This leads to an open position where the white pieces achieve early activity and find good squares. This structure allows white to play with initiative without having incurred any significant weaknesses. In a more solid approach, after c3, c6, c4, and e6, Black opts for a flexible development. Reti continues with g3, an unmistakable sign of a fianchetto and long-term control of the central squares. After the moves d5, g2, and e7, White successfully completes its natural development plan by castling, effectively securing its king and connecting its rooks. The resulting position is a highly strategic one, rich in potential maneuvers, where White consistently pressures the black center without having fully revealed its entire structure just yet. The Reti opening doesn't aim for quick advantages, but instead focuses on creating strategic discomfort for your opponent. This is an ideal choice for players who truly enjoy positional control, strategic flexibility, and a deep, profound understanding of the middle game. The Italian opening seeks to establish an active game, characterized by rapid piece development, firm control of the center, and the application of early pressure against the opposing king. It is highly popular due to its ease of learning, its capacity to launch early attacks, and its utility for both novice players and more experienced advanced players alike. Furthermore, it can be played in a very solid manner, particularly through the well-known giuoco piano variation. or, in an aggressive manner, using the Evans gambit. Both of these variations actually begin with the exact same opening moves. Both sides fight for control of the center with the king's pawn. White then brings out their knight to put pressure on that pawn. Black responds by bringing out their knight as well in order to defend it. Both players develop their bishop, aiming directly at the king's weak point. Following this, from this position you choose solid or aggressive play. The solid giuoco piano opening is characterized by strategic play and a very firm structure. After the classic start, White plays c3 to reinforce the center, while Black develops its knight, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. Then, both sides protect the center by advancing pawns to the 3rd and 6th ranks. Next, both players castle their kings to ensure their safety. Finally, White places the rook on an open file, completing the basic development. With this, the opening concludes, and the middle game begins. Grandmasters use the giuoco piano to wear down their opponent, as the game progresses without quick changes and demands great precision over many moves. After this quiet phase, the play shifts to a much more offensive game with the aggressive opening, the Evans gambit. After the initial fundamental moves of the game, White then plays b4, presenting a pawn as an offering to launch the aggressive Evans gambit. Black, in response, accepts this material sacrifice by capturing with their bishop, however. White immediately gains a valuable tempo by playing c3, forcing the bishop to withdraw. Next, White advances their pawn to d4, aiming to take control of the central squares. Both sides then continue their strategic development. White proceeds to castle, and Black responds with d3 to generate some activity. And with this, the opening phase of the game concludes, and the complex middle game truly begins.
There are two main approaches we can take when playing this opening. We can choose to play the classical variation or the Schmidt variation. The classical variation is executed in the following manner. White immediately occupies the center and mobilizes their entire army. Black responds to this challenge in a perfectly symmetrical way. The resulting conflict is absolutely inevitable. We initiate a direct attack against the crucial e5 pawn. There is absolutely no time for us to waste. Knight to f6.
This is a natural defense. Black decides to accept the central confrontation. Pawn to d4 is the move.
This is the exact moment the famous Scotch opening comes into play. White immediately breaks through the center without any further hesitation. Black accepts this crucial challenge and decides to open up the entire position. Knight to d4. The knight recaptures the pawn and firmly establishes itself right in the very heart of the chessboard. The real battle begins now. White starts with rapid development and firm control of the center, aiming to reach an endgame with a slight advantage. Black responds by simplifying, neutralizing the rival's initiative, and precisely balancing the position. The most common mistake is thinking this opening is harmless. It is perfect for positional and practical players. Now we are going to examine the Schmidt variation. Let's return to the critical moment in the game, following the capture knight takes d4. Black does not develop their position passively here. They immediately attack the central knight with the move knight f6, and then we see knight takes c6. White is repeating the same idea here. They are damaging the structure before it becomes too late. Black is accepting a significant structural weakness in exchange for potential future activity, and that is precisely why the pawn captures the knight on c6. A powerful advance is made. White is gaining significant space and forcing the enemy pieces to retreat. Queen to e7. The queen is placed with absolute precision, simultaneously defending key squares and preparing for future development. Queen e2 is played. White firmly maintains control of the center and continues to exert pressure. The knight is now centralized, taking a strong position. Black is desperately looking for immediate counterplay. The position here is no longer simple. It is modern chess, defined by dynamic imbalance, long-range strategic planning, and perpetual tension.
White occupies the center, freeing the queen and bishop. Black prepares for d5 without blocking the c8 bishop. It reinforces central control, a direct challenge to the white center, and develops and defends the e4 pawn with knight c3. Black eliminates central tension and forces white to define. White recaptures the pawn and places an active knight in the center, a key move in the Caro-Kann. The bishop moves out to e6, avoiding being trapped. They attack the bishop and gain development time with knight g3. The bishop retreats, maintaining pressure on the center and the king side. White is attempting to inconvenience the bishop and establish a stronger presence on the king side. This move effectively prevents any h5 push and offers a perfectly safe retreat square for the bishop on h7 if it becomes necessary. It's a very natural development. The white team is getting ready to castle. It strengthens its position on a5 and prepares for a6 while developing its pieces without compromising its overall structure. The goal of this variation is to reach a solid, balanced position, aiming for a good endgame. Its key characteristics are harmonious and secure piece development. The c8 bishop is active before e6, a flexible center without compromising structure, fewer immediate tactical risks, and it's very reliable for defending as black. Let's look at the advanced variation. This involves central control and the opening of lines. It's about preparing d5 while maintaining central flexibility. This move reinforces the center and supports the e4 pawn. Black immediately challenges the white central pawn structure. A typical move, white gains space and fixes the center. Bishop f5.
The key idea here is this. The bishop moves out early to e6, specifically to avoid getting trapped. This allows for a more natural development and also control over e5 and g5. Black reinforces the d5 square and gets ready for kingside development. Bishop e2.
Quiet preparation of the castling. Thematic movement. A direct attack on the white center, launched from the base. The king now moves to safety. Now white can formulate central plans, focusing on development and increasing pressure on d4 and e5 with the move knight to c6.
The Ruy Lopez. It is an opening that teaches you how to really play chess, control the center, gradually improve your pieces, and understand when to attack and when to wait. That is why it is so widely used at all levels, from learning to competition, and why it remains relevant after so many years. Everything begins with the fight for the center. Placing a central pawn not only claims space, but also opens lines so the pieces can develop smoothly. The opponent responds in the same way, accepting the central challenge and maintaining the balance. This initial exchange sets the tone. Neither side avoids the center, both fight for it. The next logical step is to develop minor pieces, and here a fundamental move appears, developing the knight to a natural square. This move fulfills several functions at once. It activates a piece, prepares castling, and also creates a direct threat against the opponent's central pawn. From move 2, a key chess concept is introduced: the initiative. Having the initiative means being the one who poses the problems. It is not just about attacking, but about forcing the opponent to react. Every threat generates a response, and the one who responds usually loses time, while the other continues developing their plan. That is why it is so important to create pressure from the very beginning, even if it does not materialize immediately. Black, in a coherent way, develops their own knight to defend the attacked pawn. This response is natural and solid. It develops a piece and neutralizes the threat. From here, white has several reasonable options, but one of the most characteristic is developing the bishop to an active square that points directly at a key defensive piece. This move defines the Ruy Lopez. The bishop not only develops, but also exerts pressure on the knight that defends the center. Again, it is not an immediate threat, but a strategic tension. The message is clear. That defensive piece could be exchanged at the right moment, weakening control of the center. One of the most important ideas of the Ruy Lopez is that many threats are not meant to win material, but to make the opponent's position uncomfortable. The French defense. It all begins with the classic opening moves e4, e6. With this particular move, black allows white to temporarily occupy the center of the board, but only for a limited time. The idea is not to fight for the center right away, but to attack it at a later point. After d4, d5, the true nature of the French defense is clearly established. Black directly challenges the white's central pawn, and they announce a very clear plan to undermine the center and then play against it. One of the most common lines of play continues with e5, advancing the pawn and gaining valuable space. Here we encounter one of the fundamental concepts of the French defense, the pawn chain. White has more space, yes, but they also create targets that black will be able to attack later on. From this moment, black's plan is clear. Strike the center with moves like c5 and f6. Develop the pieces carefully and seek counterplay on the queen's side. The c8 bishop, commonly referred to as the butt bishop, is actually one of the most crucial pieces during the opening phase of the game. Although it initially appears to be completely blocked by its own pawn structure, black typically seeks to activate it through strategic pawn breaks or clever tactical maneuvers.
The Slav defense. The Slav defense arises after d4, d5, c4, c6, and it represents a very distinct philosophy of chess. It doesn't aim to surprise. It doesn't aim to force. Its goal is to build. The central idea is simple yet powerful: to hold the center with solid pawns and develop the pieces without creating weaknesses. In the classical Slav defense, black sets up right from the beginning a remarkably robust and reliable structure. Following the pawn's advance to c6, the center becomes perfectly supported, and the development of pieces proceeds quite naturally. When white develops their pieces and strengthens central control, black doesn't hesitate to capture the c4 pawn. It's not an act of greed, it's a strategic decision to gain time, compel white to prove their compensation, and dictate the game's tempo. Every single move serves a clear purpose. Each piece finds its designated square without rushing. This is a position where victory isn't for the one who attacks first, but for the one who truly grasps the underlying structure. This variant leads to long maneuvering games, where patience is a powerful weapon. Black feels comfortable defending positions that are slightly inferior in space, because they know there are no real weaknesses to exploit. But should the player desire an additional layer of tension, the Semi-Slav makes its appearance. Here, following that very same solid opening, Black executes e6, thereby fundamentally altering the entire character of the position. The center becomes blocked, the tension escalates, and the decisions grow much more profound. The development is more restrained, but every single move is a long-term investment. The overall strategy, the plan, is not revealed too early. You wait, you prepare, you carefully gauge your opponent. The Semi-Slav isn't immediately aggressive, but it is tremendously ambitious. It offers dense positions packed with strategic ideas where a single error can completely change the balance. It's an ideal defense for players who seek solidity, but also the opportunity to counterattack when the precise moment arrives.
In the classical Queen's Indian defense, White typically begins by establishing a strong presence in the center of the board. Black then responds by developing a knight to the f6 square, effectively controlling the central squares without having to commit any pawns just yet. Following this, White plays c4, further reinforcing their central control. Black responds by preparing a solid structure and developing their pieces. Then, White develops a knight to f3, while Black plays b6, preparing to fianchetto their bishop. If you don't know what fianchetto means, you can click the top right corner, where we explain it in every detail. White advances the pawn to open the diagonal, and Black develops their bishop. Later on, White positions their bishop on g2, and Black in turn develops their own bishop, exerting pressure on the central squares from a considerable distance. Subsequently, White castles their king to safety, and Black responds by castling as well, ensuring both monarchs are securely protected. Following the castling maneuvers, White proceeds to reinforce the center of the board, and Black, already having achieved good development, advances their queen's pawn to effectively occupy the central area. With this, the opening phase draws to a close and the complex middle game truly begins. Top-tier players frequently utilize the classical variation to secure a robust and perfectly balanced position, gradually applying pressure to the central squares, and then entering a middle game phase where refined technique and absolute precision truly distinguish the winner. In the Petrosian variation, White starts the game by immediately occupying the central squares, seeking to gain a significant space advantage and establish control over the board right from the very beginning. Black, in turn, responds by making moves that adopt a flexible and adaptable posture, effectively controlling the center without jeopardizing their pawn structure or overall position. White then proceeds to strengthen their central position further by playing the move c4. Black plays e6, preparing the characteristic structure of the Queen's Indian defense and the subsequent development of their pieces. White develops a knight, increasing control of the central squares. The opponent continues with the preparation of the Queen's bishop fianchetto. White plays a3, the characteristic move of the Petrosian variation, with a prophylactic idea that limits the opponent's options. Subsequently, they develop their bishop, putting pressure on the center from the long diagonal. White reinforces the center and completes their development. Black develops their other bishop, maintaining a solid position. White prepares and completes the fianchetto, controlling the center from afar. The opponent secures their king by castling, and finally the game transitions to the middle game.
The English opening. It originates with the move c4, proposing control of the center from the flanks, thereby avoiding any premature commitments. Its central idea revolves around strategic flexibility, which allows the white pieces to adapt their play according to the opponent's specific response. In the initial variation, the white pieces commence with the c4 pawn move, aiming to dominate the crucial d5 square without directly occupying the very center of the board. Black responds with e5, immediately claiming a significant portion of the central board, and then white proceeds to develop their knight to c3, thereby considerably increasing the strategic pressure upon those crucial key squares. Following the natural development of the black knight to f6, white then plays knight f3, thereby completing a solid setup without making any structural commitments. This particular line allows white to maintain numerous open plans, giving them flexibility without having to reveal their strategic intentions too early in the game. It serves as a highly effective strategic instrument, especially when facing well-prepared opponents. In the second variation, following c4, black opts for c5, entering a symmetrical structure that seeks immediate equilibrium. White develops their knight to f3 with complete flexibility, while black reinforces the central area with knight c6. At the right moment, white breaks with d4, transforming the lateral pressure into active central control.
This variation leads to dynamic positions where strategic understanding is more important than theoretical knowledge. It rewards players who skillfully manage their transitions into the middle game.
The Evans Gambit has two key variations. One is the accepted Evans Gambit, where the game begins with a pawn occupying the center and freeing up the main lines. The response is symmetrical, accepting an open game right from the very start. A knight naturally develops and begins to put pressure on the center. The defense arrives, developing another minor piece and reinforcing that crucial area. The bishop is placed on a very active diagonal, pointing directly towards the enemy king. The reply is an equivalent development that aims to maintain the balance. At this moment, the characteristic idea of the Evans Gambit appears. The pawn on the queen's flank advances to offer itself in sacrifice, and the rival bishop accepts it, penetrating enemy territory. Next, a new pawn advances, attacking that bishop and preparing central control, forcing it to retreat without losing activity. Then comes the thematic central blow with the pawn advance that opens lines and launches the initiative. Black reacts by capturing the central pawn with the idea of slowing down White's initiative and simplifying the position. White responds by securing their king through a kingside castle, completing their piece development and preparing their rooks to enter the fray. The opponent then reinforces the central area with a strong pawn advance, seeking to establish defensive stability. Finally, White recovers the material in the center, achieving an active and very well-coordinated position, transitioning into the middle game with a clear initiative. Grandmasters frequently employ the Evans Gambit to gain quick initiative and rapid activity, even at the cost of a pawn, to steer the game into highly dynamic positions right from the opening. In the declined Evans Gambit variation, the game commences with an immediate control of the center, and the response preserves the symmetry and the open character of the position. Following this, a knight enters the game, applying pressure to that crucial central area, while the defense strategically organizes itself by developing an additional knight and solidifying its structure. Subsequently, the bishop becomes active, targeting an early weakness, while the opposing bishop develops without making any commitments. At this precise moment, the Evans Gambit is presented, offering the queenside pawn, but on this specific occasion, the sacrifice is refused, and the bishop then retreats. Following this, space is gained in that part of the board, pinning down the opponent's structure, and the response aims to solidify the position and prevent awkward breaches. The center is calmly reinforced, preparing the complete development, while another piece enters the game, increasing central pressure. Finally, the king is secure after castling. The center is strengthened once again, and the opening is now fully defined. The game opens with pawn to d4. Black responds by developing their knight to f6. White reinforces the central position with pawn to c4. Black begins to prepare their pawn structure. Following this, White prepares the fianchetto with bishop to g3, and Black takes control of the center. The bishop emerges onto the long diagonal, and immediately Black captures the c4 pawn, which leads to knight to f3. Black brings out their bishop. Next, both colors castle. The white queen centralizes, and the black pawn advances preventively. After that, White stops the rival's expansion, which leads to the black team attacking the center. White captures their pawn, and the black bishop recaptures, so the white queen recovers the lost pawn. And this is how the game would look after an open position. It's a very solid and patient strategy, notable for constantly making the opponent uncomfortable, forcing them to commit errors that very possibly end up costing them the game. Now we're going to look at the closed variation. As in the open, we start with pawn to d4, and black develops their knight to f6. White wants to gain control of the center, so black prepares the central advance. Immediately after, White prepares the fianchetto, and black responds by occupying the center. The white bishop comes out through a fianchetto, so black makes a natural development, bishop e7. The white team moves their knight to f3. Subsequently, both teams proceed to castle. Once castled, black solidifies the center with their c6 pawn. The white queen then moves to c2, positioning herself centrally. Black proceeds to develop their knight to d7. Both white and black then advance their respective pawns in order to activate their bishops. Finally, the white knight moves to d2, which concludes the opening's setup and begins the middle game.
The Sicilian Defense is widely regarded as one of the most dynamic and exciting openings in the entire game of chess. It's a preferred choice for those who desire an aggressive game right from the outset, as it empowers Black to seize the initiative and directly challenge White from the very beginning. It's not merely about defending, it's about actively creating opportunities to pressure the opponent, gain crucial space, and meticulously prepare attacks across various sections of the board. If you truly learn and understand the fundamental basic ideas, you will then be able to surprise your opponent and effectively maintain complete control of the game, even if it appears that he possesses much more experience than you do. White moves their pawn, and you respond with c5. At this very moment, your opponent has only a limited number of options available. The Sicilian Defense is widely recognized as one of the most powerful and effective openings in chess, but it's also considered one of the most intricate and challenging to master. However, there's no need to worry. I have carefully organized this particular opening into a series of small, manageable missions that are specifically designed to be easy for beginners to fully understand. In a few minutes, you'll learn how to put your opponent in trouble from the very first moves. Your first mission focuses on your c-file pawn. Naturally, you start by moving it. But what do you do next? This particular pawn has a very specific and clear objective. The Sicilian Defense, as you know, seeks to control and attack the central squares from the queen side, and your c-pawn is an absolutely fundamental and crucial part of that overall strategy. It is specifically targeting a highly strategic zone on the chessboard. Just wait, and if your rival ventures into that zone, take him without any hesitation. That is your primary objective. There are countless variations that can arise based on how you decide to move your pawns, but through these straightforward missions, you'll grasp the fundamental essentials required for any beginner. In the vast majority of matches, the white pieces typically won't offer their pawn as a sacrifice right away. Instead, they could choose to move any other piece on the board. Your next objective is to place your bishop in a strategic position that allows it to exert significant pressure over the entire board. To achieve this first, you must move the pawn that is currently blocking its path. Then, after clearing the way, you can effectively develop your bishop. But pay close attention. The white pieces are advancing their central pawn. Do you still remember your plan? You must capture it immediately. Don't you worry about anything else just yet. They recapture. And now, you can continue with your normal development. Your bishop is already in a good position. White will make one more move, and then it's time for you to develop your knight. If they capture that piece from you, there's really no cause for concern. You simply recapture, and you will have a completely open file for your rook. This is truly excellent because then you will be able to initiate a powerful attack on the queen side. If it's not captured, that's perfectly fine. Develop your pieces, following a pattern that will eventually become quite familiar to you. Move the pawn, then the knight, castle. If you don't know what that means, you can click the top right, where we will explain castling to you in every detail. Place the bishop and finally the rook. It's easy to remember where the pieces go, but the order can be a little more difficult to memorize. Observe. First the knight, then the pawn. Another knight, then castle, bishop, and rook. After advancing the pawn and placing the bishop, simply follow the order and develop all your pieces. There are two configurations you should know. This particular one is among them. Through these missions, you have already learned a significant portion, specifically half of the Sicilian Defense. This is precisely the strategic arrangement that you are currently seeking. If your c-pawn has already been exchanged, or you haven't managed to do so, you will then require an alternative setup.
In the classic variation, the game begins with a pawn advance that takes space in the center, which is met by the development of a knight to control that area. Soon after, the center is reinforced with another pawn while the bishop's fianchetto is being prepared. If you're unfamiliar with what a fianchetto is, you can click the top right corner, where we'll explain it in much more detail. The development of a minor piece continues to support the central position, and the opposing bishop then comes into play, putting pressure on that structure. A new pawn push creates a strong center, met by securing the defensive base. Later, another piece is developed to reinforce board control, and the king is castled to safety. Next, a bishop is developed to complete the castling, and a central pawn break attacks the position. Finally, the king castles, and the position is ready for the middle game. Grandmasters use the classical variation because it is solid and secure. It allows them to develop their pieces well, maintain balance, and reach a stable middle game without taking unnecessary risks. In the 4 pawns attack variation, the game begins with an ambitious occupation of the center, which is countered by developing a knight to exert pressure. The central control is reinforced by another pawn push, while the bishop's fianchetto is prepared. Later, a piece develops to support the position, and the enemy bishop enters play, targeting the center. A new pawn push creates a very strong central structure and is met with the consolidation of the defense. Then, a 4th pawn is advanced, initiating a clearly aggressive plan while the rival king is brought to safety. Next, the center and the attack are supported, but the opponent reacts by directly attacking the central structure. The white bishop develops to support the center and prepare for the king's castling. The black pieces continue their development, reinforcing the pressure on the center. Finally, the king castles, the position becomes consolidated, and the game transitions into the middle game. White occupies the center with their queen's pawn, while black develops their knight and controls the center. White reinforces their central position and gains more space, and black prepares the fianchetto of their bishop. White supports the center and develops a piece. For their part, black directly challenges white's central structure. White eliminates the tension and exchanges in the center. However, black recaptures with the knight and activates a piece. The white pieces seek to dominate the center and use the space to initiate an attack or restrict the black pieces. Black, however, accepts yielding space to provoke a center they can then attack, generating activity, counterplay, and initiative. Let's now take a look at the Russian variation. White establishes control of the center with their queen's pawn, while black develops their knight and maintains central control. White then reinforces the center and gains valuable space, and black prepares the fianchetto of their bishop. White supports the center and develops another piece. Black, for its part, directly challenges the central structure that white has established. White maintains the tension and reinforces the center, while the black bishop fianchettos itself and begins to exert pressure on the center from a long distance.
The Nimzo-Indian opening originates from a revolutionary concept in modern chess, not to directly fight for the center with pawns, but rather to control it with pieces. Popularized by Aaron Nimzowitsch, who is widely considered the father of hyper-modern chess, it very quickly became a common and effective weapon at the highest levels of play. It appears after the moves d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and bishop b4, where black pins the knight, indirectly attacks the center, and poses an uncomfortable question from the 3rd move. How are you going to defend your structure if I attack you now? The Nimzo-Indian is a closed and hypermodern opening, which gives rise to many sub-variations depending on white's chosen response. In the classical variation, specifically with the movie DC2, players aim for a solid development while carefully avoiding the creation of doubled pawns. Meanwhile, the Rubinstein variation, characterized by the move E3, provides the greatest possible flexibility. The Siamish variation, specifically with the move A3, compels the black bishop to make a crucial and immediate decision. The Leningrad variation, by playing BG5, applies direct pressure right onto the center of the board. There isn't just one Nimzo-Indian, it's a complete system, highly adaptable to each player's unique style and character. Within this broad universe of possibilities, the Rubinstein variation with E3 truly stands out. It's widely considered the most solid and flexible option available when playing against the Nimzo-Indian defense. White protects the knight on C3 and naturally prepares the development of the F1 bishop. Strategically, the main idea is to avoid revealing the queen too early, to keep multiple strategic plans open, and to embrace a slow, deep struggle. Following the move E3, white conveys a very clear message. They are not going to concede any weaknesses without a fight. Black usually responds with castling D5 or C5, aiming to attack the center from a distance. The usual plans for white include a harmonious development and the construction of a strong center with E4 at the opportune moment. Black, for their part, exerts constant pressure on C4 and D4 and carefully chooses when to capture on C3. The most common mistake is to play passively and give up the initiative. This is an ideal variation for patient, technical players who enjoy long endgames like Anatoly Karpov. The classic variation with DC2 is the most ambitious response. The queen defends the knight and announces a clear intention to obtain the bishop pair and dominate the center.
Their strategic idea is to avoid any structural damage, to quickly prepare e4, and to play for the initiative and for space. With dc2, white directly challenges black, implying that if the exchange on c3 occurs, the bishops will certainly impose their power. Black players typically react with d5 or c5, aiming to strike at the center before white's e4 pawn can fully consolidate its position. White seeks to establish a strong central presence and launch attacks in the middle game, while black endeavors to blockade the center and exploit the queen's premature development. A very common mistake often observed is pushing the e4 pawn without sufficient or proper preparation.
If this video finally helps you understand how to start a game well, don't just stay here. Subscribe, calmly review the openings, and start applying them in your own games. Every opening you see here is designed for you to play with more confidence and fewer errors from the start. Like it, save the video, and come back to it whenever you don't know how to open. Start playing with clear ideas from the very first move.
BlackChess Academy, the best chess training and education.